Hello, onegaishimasu. It can be surprising to find out that there are dozens of words used for slightly different parts of a Japanese sword. Today we'll focus on a few terms which will be very useful to know if you're looking to practice sword work with a katana or bokken. Here are stylized forms of a katana at the top and a bokken below. The katana is the typical Japanese longsword used by the bushi or samurai. It is still used in solo exercises in such martial arts as Aikido. As it is obviously dangerous to perform practice with a partner, training is normally performed with a bokken, a sword typically carved out of red or white oak. They are normally very plain, although they can have decoration and may come with a handguard and a sheath. At first glance, you'll notice which end of the sword is meant to be held. The handle is known as the tsuka, and it will normally be about a foot long if it's meant to be wielded with two hands. There are a few different pieces that make up the handle in a real sword, but there are two words which are useful to remember. The tsuka ito is the wrapping which goes around the handle. It can appear like a bootlace that's been tied around the grip, but is often made of silk, cotton, or leather. The kashira is the name for a cap that's placed over the end of the sword. Like a pommel in European swords, it can sometimes be used to strike an opponent, especially when tangled up or being grappled. You can also use the word to clarify which end of the sword you're talking about. It's usually obvious from the carving of the wood where the handle is supposed to end and the blade begin. At the join between the tsuka and the blade itself, you will find the handguard, or tsuba. Although it gives some protection against cuts made to the hands, its main job is to stop the swordsman's hands travelling up the blade when thrusting. They are often absent from bokken, as there's no danger of the martial artist cutting themselves, but can be used to protect the hands in more energetic sparring. Even if the rest of the sword is being kept deliberately plain, the tsuba is typically decorated and can have very detailed artwork etched into the metal. The blade has many different points on it that have different terms, but here are a few important ones. A katana is a one-edged sword. This means that only one side is sharpened. This cutting edge is known as ha. It's also important to remember that although the sword is sharp along the length of the cutting edge, a swordsman is typically trying to stay at range from an opponent and will be wanting to cut with the end of the blade, about the last 6 inches of the sword. On traditionally forged blades, you'll see a wavy line running just inside the edge. This is the hamon, and is formed by the tempering process in forging. It gives a real sword a very pleasing look, so it's often replicated on cheaply made swords with chemical treatments. The Kissaki is the tip of the blade. Because the tip can have different angles and can be shaped in certain styles, there are many different descriptive words used around Kissaki. The back or unsharpened edge is known as the mune. This is a lot thicker than the ha, and gives the sword most of its weight. Just inside the mune, you may find a groove. This can run just a short way from near the tip or the whole length of the blade. This is the hi. Although some people think of this as a blood groove or channel, its purpose is to change the properties of the blade. It can help reduce the weight and modify the balance or flexibility of the metal. Normally, you won't find a sword uncovered and ready to use. You'll typically find it held in its sheath, which the Japanese call saya. There is a cap at the very end of the saya, where the kissaki or tip of the sword would be. This is called kojiri. Near the top of the saya is a fastening called the kurigata, which has a cord called the sageo running through it. The sageo allows the sword to be attached to the clothing on a samurai or martial artist. When the sword is displayed in its saya, the sageo is often tied into an intricate pattern. The opening in the sheath where you put the sword into is called koiguchi. This is actually from the two words koi, fish, and kuchi, mouth. It's an interesting image and a fun word to remember during sword work. Obviously, you don't need to remember all of these words immediately, but I hope this video has given you a better way to describe parts of the sword. Please like and share it if it did, and feel free to use the annotations to rewatch this or some of my other videos. Domo arigatou gozaimasu.